So welcome everyone to AAM's workshop on investigating and documenting animal cruelty. Illegal and unethical animal cruelty must be investigated and documented in order to in order for it to be permanently stopped. This workshop with mentors ShimonYaakov and Robert Grillo of Slaughter-Free Cities will cover documenting violations of city and state laws to trigger investigations, building a track record of violations, photographic evidence gathering, and the presenters will share their personal experiences documenting activities during Kaporos, live markets, slaughterhouses, and much more. So my name is Michelle Granberg, and I'm your moderator tonight. I'm a mentor and team member with Animal Activism Mentorship. I'm located in New Jersey, and I've been a vegan and activist for 5 years. A little bit about AAM. AAM's mission is to build a global community of powerful and effective activists in order to meet our ultimate goal of animal liberation. We offer a free online program dedicated to pairing experienced mentors with those who want to gain the knowledge, experience, and confidence necessary to start speaking up for non-human animals. Additionally, we offer free workshops that train and educate our mentors, mentees, and the public on various aspects of veganism and animal rights activism. We're also proud to announce our strategic alliance with one of the oldest animal rights organizations in the world, Farmed Animal Rights Movement, or FARM. So if you're interested in becoming a mentor after tonight, or a mentee, or just want to get more involved, please visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com, and follow both AAM and FARM on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Clubhouse. So with that, we're going to begin. I'm very excited to introduce our presenters. Our first speaker is ShimonYaakov. Shim is a mentor, activist, and rabbinical student. So Shim, I'm gonna send it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Michelle. Hi, everybody. I'm looking forward to sharing some lessons learned with all of you. And actually, until relatively recently, I saw myself as having no experience whatsoever in documenting animal cruelty until this year, the week leading up to Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, when I was basically doing nothing but documenting for a whole week. And I went into it not really knowing what I was getting myself into, and nothing about being strategic and what works, what doesn't work, because I didn't really realize that I would be documenting. I thought I'd be going to participate in protests, and it turned out to be something quite different. So I learned a lot throughout the week, and I'd like to think that I got much better. And I'm going to share with you some of what I picked up from that week, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what Robert has to say afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, some takeaways from Kaporos documentation. First of all, I wanted to just open up with a question. Why put emphasis on documentation at all? And Paul McCartney said a lot that I like. I'm a big Beatles fan, but my favorite quote that I ever heard that came from him is, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be vegetarian. And I wish that were true. Actually, it's not. But people seeing what's going on behind the scenes and seeing cases of animal cruelty that goes on every single day for the purpose of the regular everyday human being being able to benefit from the animal world in some way. Seeing that, having a glimpse of the darkness definitely pushes many people towards vegetarian, in this quote, but really towards veganism. That's what did it for me. I never had any idea until I read Jonathan Safran Foer's book, Eating Animals, in which he was writing about what he saw. And then it was when I watched Dominion. It was actually 4 years later, 4 years after I read Eating Animals, when I went from being a vegan to an activist. People don't want blood in their hands if they're compassionate and if they're decent. And when they see the direct consequences of their actions, they change. Hopefully. Okay. So I broke this up into two sections. First of all, preparation, and then during the documentation. So preparation, of course, know the law of where you are. This is something that I actually did not appreciate the importance of at the time until a little bit after Kaporos. In a different situation, I was with Penima at a festival in Freedom Park, and there was a case of animal cruelty going on, which was part of the entertainment at the park. We heard that this would be going on, and we went there and we took pictures, we documented, and we called animal cruelty. And they had already received calls about this, and they tried to claim that there was an exemption, and that the animals that were being treated the way they were not protected by animal cruelty laws in North Carolina. Turns out she was wrong about that, and Penima was able to quote the exact location and the exact law. And when the animal control didn't do anything, word got out, and actually news came and filmed Penima speaking about this on the TV station here in Charlotte. And that was because we were prepared, or at least she was prepared, and knew a violation and got it on camera. And then the commissioner came around as well and was also speaking out against it. This is a link to what I found to be a very helpful site, straypetadvocacy.org, animal cruelty laws state by state. Okay, second of all, know the area where you're going into, not just the place where the cruelty is happening, but know the neighborhood, know what the area is like, know what the place is like. When it came to Kaporos, a lot of times we were going to backyards of people's homes. We were going to the back of synagogues where this ritual of Kaporot, we've already had workshops in Kaporos, so I'm not going to give all the details, but let's call it for now a chicken sacrifice ritual in pursuit of atonement. We wanted to blend in with the community. And there are certain ways where if you dress a certain way, if you speak a certain way, you look like you belong, and your presence there is not going to be questioned. Even if you do, whip out a smartphone and take a picture here or there. There was a day when Penima and I were there, and we were trying to do some documentation. And a few minutes later, there was another group of about 6 or 7 people, a group that we were a part of and we worked with the day before. They showed up sticking out like sore thumbs with vegan pins and PETA pins and a couple signs. And they came to, and we were associating with each other, and it kind of blew, our whole plan fell apart that day. They also wanted, some of them also wanted to fit in, but clearly didn't know what the neighborhood was like and actually how to do that. So know the area. Going along with that, know your story. Every single day before Penima and I, we did all the documentation together, before we entered into a location where the animal cruelty would happen, we role played, and we took turns pretending to be someone who was there, and then ourselves. So we practiced, for example, who are you? What's your story? Where are you from? And then if someone gets suspicious, oh, actually, why are you here? And we made sure that the answers were realistic, they were prepared, they were smooth, and we had our whole story ready to rock and roll every single time before we even got to the neighborhood. Have a plan for potential rescues. So I mentioned that I didn't realize we would be doing documentation until we actually started doing documentation. And then once we started, I also didn't plan that I didn't realize that we should be prepared for rescuing animals at the drop of a hat. There was one moment when we were about to leave, and a rooster was just running by Penima's legs, and she didn't even think. She just bent down, grabbed it, put it under her scarf, and we were able to help save a life. We didn't have a plan. We parked very far, and it was not easy leaving that property in basically while trying to protect a life that we were holding. That's not what people there go to do. So we were still trying to fit in. And then even once we got out of the property, we had to walk down a street several blocks away. We came back the next day, and we took extra time to look for parking nearby, knowing that there might be another opportunity to save more lives. And actually there was, believe it or not, we saved a goose the very next day. So have a plan for potential rescues, even though that's not why you're there, because we're always looking for opportunities to save lives when and where we can. Check equipment, of course. On one of the days, I had two phones, one in which I was taking audio, another one in which I was taking video, and the phone with audio died, actually. And finally, have an out. This goes along with knowing the area, knowing your surroundings. Keep your eyes wide open for where all of the exits are. And if you have to leave quickly, what's the best and most direct route? Okay, so that's preparation. How about during the actual documentation? So first of all, make sure the location of where you're documenting is indisputable. So if you have record of animal abuse on camera or on video, that no one can come and claim, oh, that actually was not my property. And I'll show you some pictures in a little bit. We have pictures of the neighborhood walking up to the home where this was happening, and then the full yard, and then finally close-ups. So it was impossible to argue that the footage we have was coming from somewhere else. Keep camera and or microphone on at all times. And this actually goes along with 2 points later, get them talking, ask probing questions. There was one moment when I struck up a conversation with a few people who were working at one of these Kaporos stations. They saw me filming and asked that I put my camera away, and I put it in my bag thinking that I left the audio on. And that was the day that my phone, where I was trying to keep audio going, when that phone died. So I ended up missing several minutes of what was incredible material, which was pretty damning for the whole concept, or for so many justifications that people try to draw on when saying that Kaporos is okay. People who were working there were basically admitting that even while people try to justify Kaporos by saying that their bodies are then donated to the needy, as if that makes it any better, that almost all the time that is not true. And while they work there as a business and participate in the butchering, they themselves don't use chickens for their own Kaporos ritual, because they don't believe that it actually works if the chicken's body is not donated. And they see chickens' bodies are not donated. Right next to them, we saw piles and piles and piles of garbage bags of bodies of chickens, because nobody wants to eat these chickens who are treated so horribly and are festering with disease by the time they get there anyway. So the chickens are killed and they're thrown out. We had people who were working there admitting this to our face, along with many other things. They were saying that they believe that there's violations of biblical law of not being cruel to animals, some of them were saying. And sometimes Jews don't realize, Jewish people who try to justify Kaporot, they don't realize this is a violation, and here it was coming from one of the butcher's mouths. There was just, I've already spoken about a lot of this in a different workshop, but I missed all of it. And when I saw that my phone didn't record, oh my gosh, I was heartbroken. Okay, ask probing questions. Some of them they don't see what they're doing is wrong, and they take pride in their work and they want to justify what they're doing. So if you ask, there was one moment when we saw a chicken who was slaughtered, and there's a myth in Jewish circles that kosher slaughter is okay because it's instant and the chicken feels no pain. Well, before our eyes, we saw chickens who were hanging upside down being bled out, and they were still flapping their wings and struggling for dear life, struggling so hard that they wrestled their way out of the upside down traffic cone and were on the ground flapping and twisting and turning. One of them even was able to run around for a little bit with a slashed neck. I've never met Jewish people beforehand who realized that it's agonizing and takes several minutes sometimes for an animal who's killed by a kosher knife to finally die. Okay, so ask probing questions. Oh, I noticed that chicken there, their throat slashed, but they're still alive. Is that usual? And they might say, oh, actually, yeah, it's not so unusual, but they don't feel the pain. Yeah, they might live for another few more minutes, but eventually they'll bleed out. So if you ask probing questions and you get them talking, you might be shocked about what kind of recording you'll end up getting. Have a record of your right to be there. This one ended up being very important. We went on the actual day of Yom Kippur back to one of the locations where the Kaporos ritual happens the previous day. And since it was the day of the holiday, there was nobody around. So we basically had free reign of the yard. We're taking pictures of everything we saw, and it looked like a screenshot of hell. And I'll show you a couple pictures in a few minutes from that as well. We called animal control. They came, the police came. They too were beyond shock. They didn't get there until after we left. And they ended up treating the scene kind of like it was a crime scene investigation in their eyes. They ended up carrying out chickens in body bags to do autopsies to see how the chickens died, what kind of neglect they died from, the ones that weren't killed according to the ritual. And right now there's a case that's being brought. I don't have all the details. Soon we'll be talking to the DA, and they want to see all the footage that we have. But the owner of the property arrived and the police were there, and of course was furious and claimed that he has video footage of us trespassing on his lawn and that he's going to file charges as well. Well, unfortunately for him, the day before, we had video footage of all of us working together, because he ended up having upwards of over 1,000 chickens he didn't know what to do with, and was trying to just dump them on us because he didn't want them to be his problem anymore. So when the police saw that the day before we were invited to his property, and that he was clearly expected us to be there and was depending on us to help him move these chickens around, and we have witnesses, not that we needed any once it was on camera, so that's big. So have a record of your right to be there. Yeah, that's all that I'll say about that for now. Keep eyes open for rescue opportunities, but remember why you're there. I spoke about that a bit in the last slide. And finally, keep your eyes open for ways to get back in. In our case, we were able to get back in because it was just in the yard. But if there's an animal there who's suffering, that's in urgent need of emergency care, and you're on the property one day doing documentation because somehow they let you in, how can you get back in maybe when you're in a position to free the animal from the horrific situation that they found themselves in? Okay, so I'm going to walk you through a few pictures and speak about why I thought they were important and what kind of story they tell. All of these are screenshots from video, by the way, so when we do speak to the prosecution about all of these instances of animal abuse, they're going to see this in video form. There are all of these crates that were still closed. Each of the crates, almost all the crates had both living and dead chickens inside. The chickens were bloated. They were so clearly diseased and suffered miserably. And then their live brothers and sisters right there with them, wallowing in the stench. Okay, these three pictures also, this is one of the moments I spoke about. This happened more than once on video, where you see, I don't know if you all can see my mouse. I'm looking at the left-hand side picture. This is one of the chickens whose throat was slashed minutes ago, flapped so hard, and is now falling face first onto the ground. And then this is someone lifted the chicken back up by their leg, just dropped them right back in the cone. This is it happening again. You see it's coming from a different cone. And I've actually shown this to Jewish people. I'm Jewish myself. I've shown this to people with whom I share religious faith, and they were astounded. And they might not participate in Kaporos, but they do eat meat. They do eat chickens, and think that it's a humane way to slaughter an animal. But actually, it's not. And in this video, you can actually hear me saying to the microphone, for all those of you who thought that kosher slaughter is humane, you're looking at it. This is kosher slaughter right before your eyes. So that dispels that myth. More of the same. Okay, so this is what I was saying about making sure it's indisputable where the property is. If you just have close-ups of the cases of animal abuse, it can easily be denied. Oh, no, I had nothing to do with that. That's not my property. We have video of us walking from down the street, making a right. This is a big shot of the property. This is the day of Yom Kippur when it's empty. Bags of chicken bodies So there were signs everywhere advertising this person's Kaporos ritual station. Basically, it was being treated like a festival. There were balloons being given to little kids in the shape of roosters and chickens. And I think it's important for people to basically see the aftermath, see what happens when the lights are turned off and when living chickens are still left behind. And next year, whether this operation gets shut down or not, even if it doesn't, we can show this to people and say, look what you're supporting. If you participate in this individual's Kaporos operation, he's the one who owns like 6 different major locations where the Kaporos was happening. Almost all the Kaporos in New Jersey was under this person's responsibility, the same individual. And these signs were everywhere. So there they were. Okay, so I think that's the last picture I have. Okay, actually, Michelle, I'll go ahead and stop there and pass it back to you. So thank you, everyone, for listening.
Okay. That was great, Shim. That was really, I felt like we were all going on the journey with you of documenting and going through Kaporos again. Really important, impactful stuff. And I certainly hope it yields results like I know we're hoping that it does. But from there, now we're going to go to our next speaker, Robert Grillo. Robert is a AAM mentor, author, speaker, and activist. He is an organizer of Slaughter-Free Cities and founder of Free From Harm. I hope I got that correct, Robert, but you can add or detract from that in terms of your introduction, but go ahead and take it from now. Take it from here.
Thanks, Michelle. And thank you, Shim, for sharing that about Kaporos. I unfortunately have had experiences with Kaporos too in Chicago, where I'm based. And the last one I was at, I was assaulted by people performing Kaporos just for for having my camera up and not speaking to them, not engaging them. But they came out after me and they kicked my camera out of my hand. And then activists who went there the next day for another Kaporos thing that I didn't go to said that there were people asking for me and that someone had a warrant for wanted to serve me a lawsuit, which was really strange because only a sheriff can actually serve legal papers from an attorney. But so it was just really bizarre. Like the whole experience was terrifying and bizarre. I don't personally know what to do with Kaporos. It's so overwhelming and there would be so many animals to rescue that I just don't know how to grapple with that. So I appreciate your work doing that. What I think I'm going to talk about today and what I prepared for is to talk about Slaughter-Free Cities' approach to investigative work. So I'm going to share my screen. And so I don't know how many people are familiar with Slaughter-Free Chicago or our network of Slaughter-Free City teams around the country and a few in Europe and Canada. But Slaughter-Free Cities' goal is to end slaughter in the cities where we have teams working, and also in many cases defeat newly proposed slaughterhouses, make it very difficult, if not close them, make it very difficult for them to operate in the hopes that some will close up shop, and we go where they go, you know. So if as slaughterhouses, there's a trend now as slaughterhouses start opening in areas where there's more urban development, we're starting to see a lot of clashes between lots of different people in society and these companies, the slaughterhouse industry. So it's interesting because it used to be a really consolidated industry, which had its facilities in these very remote locations. And now suddenly, since COVID, and I don't know what happened to the slaughterhouse industry exactly, except that they lost a lot of workers and a lot of people got sick and they reached capacity. But since, the pandemic, there's been this trend to open up smaller scale slaughterhouses in more urban areas, and we're seeing it all over the country. So slaughter-free cities has kind of risen to the challenge of trying to stop that whole trend and confront it. So in any case, could talk about that all in one presentation, but I'm just going to focus on some of the work we do in terms of investigating here in Chicago. Excuse me. So we use kind of a three-pronged approach, which is like Shim said, research, knowing the laws, determining which agencies have jurisdiction over the slaughterhouses, which means which agencies are responsible for inspections, for issuing licenses and taking them away in some cases, because business licenses can be taken away if certain conditions aren't met. And they're not compelled to do it, but if there's pressure on officials to do it because it's warranted, then sometimes we can put the right amount of pressure on them to take a license away. So researching and then investigating and then reporting is kind of our approach. And once the research part is the toughest for us, and it's ongoing because laws change and we learn new things every day. We learn about city laws or state laws that we didn't know about, and how they're being enforced or not enforced. And so every day is like, you're learning something new, but the more you know, the better your chances of having the impact you want. I want to provide a few examples. Look, so in Chicago, we have, on the city level, there's Chicago Department of Public Health, which inspects slaughterhouses and has specific rules pertaining to them. And then there's the Illinois Department of Agriculture, which is responsible for inspecting them as well, and also licensing them. So they have a city and a state license. So we'll get into that a little bit. Don't want to bore you too much with that though. So in the investigative stage, we're capturing photographic evidence and putting together like an eyewitness report to go along with it. And so that's the third part, is reporting to the proper agencies, and in our reporting demanding that they investigate. And sometimes this, as you can imagine, leads to a pressure campaign where when we don't get the right responses, then we turn this into a pressure campaign with calls to actions, asking our members and our people to put pressure on the proper targets. So we can get into that a little bit later. But a couple of good reasons of why this strategy works for us. The first is that reporting violations can trigger enforcement. It can trigger inspections, investigations, and stricter regulation, which is what we want. Because what's interesting is when you look into the laws, you find that they're not being enforced and these places are not following them at all. And if they were enforced, these places could never, ever comply. Like every single time we go into places in Chicago, we're still stunned. Even though we've been there 3 or 4 or 5 times before, we're like, how do these places pass the most rudimentary health inspection? How is it possible? I mean, anybody in their right mind would say, okay, we don't know the details of this kind of inspection. However, the spirit of the laws is that these places are expected to run a sanitary and clean and healthy facility. And it's a complete sham the way they operate, and how the agencies responsible for oversight allow these places to continue for years operating this way. So the reporting on the violations is important because it triggers enforcement. It also builds a history. So with some places that have been open for 10 years, we want to build a history of the violations that we've seen and documented and reported to officials and say, hey, we've been reporting on this to you for 5 years. And if this ever goes to trial, we can show the court, or we can show the inspector general, because we have an investigation prompted by our complaint that the inspector general is conducting against the Department of Agriculture for their failure to enforce laws on slaughterhouses. And now, so they're now being investigated by an independent body. And we have argued that we can show a pattern of failure, not just an isolated case, but years of the Department of Ag being incompetent and failing to enforce its laws. So we've got a track record. That's important. That's another important part about reporting. And then the third is, as I mentioned before, the more evidence, the more incriminating evidence we have, the greater the need for, and the greater the response to calls to action. So the more incriminating the evidence, the more people want to, the more people are outraged, the more they want to actually get involved, take action, make phone calls, show up for protests, or whatever it is we're asking them to do. And becoming kind of involved in this investigative work, we like to train people a bit. We like to have like what animal activism mentorship is doing, which is pairing people that are a bit more experienced with people that are just getting their feet wet, so to speak. That's a great model to help mentor people. And so, yeah, this can often become, like I said before, this is like when people see with their own eyes, they can also become deeper and stronger activists. They can speak from a place of firsthand experience and say, I didn't just see this video online. I experienced this for myself, and believe me, this is what I saw, this is what we saw. And that can really go far to convincing people to take action. So I want to, this is kind of boring, but I'll show it to you just briefly, just to show you what we thought through in terms of training our investigators. We call them monitors too sometimes. Can everybody see this checklist? Is that coming up okay?
Yes, it is. We can see it, Robert.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure because okay, so we've done, since we know that in Chicago, there are 2 different agencies involved in inspecting. We've got it broken down by agency. Chicago Department of Public Health is CDPH. And then we got IDA, which is an Illinois Department of Agriculture violations, as number 2, or the second part. There's a much more focus on city laws, but a lot of these things that fall under CDPH are also violations of the state law, Illinois Department of Ag law too. So I'm not going to go through these, but I'll share this with anybody who's interested, just to get a sense. But most of these are problems with sanitation and problems with the condition of animals. One thing that Chicago Department of Public Health says is animals should be kept clean, healthy, and in good condition, which is really a sick joke for anyone who's been in these places, to think that these animals would be kept in good condition, clean or healthy. The very opposite is true, and they know it, but they're not enforcing that law. But in any case, we keep driving the point home that their inspectors are not seeing, or not properly trained. They're not seeing dead animals that we have documented for them. They're not seeing animals that are laying down, that are breathing heavily, that are hyperventilating, are obviously dying or sick. So ones that have open wounds, injuries, can't stand on their legs, obviously there's something wrong with them. And they come back and they'll say, well, we're not veterinarians, so we really can't assess the health of animals. And but the point is that a lot of people that are companion parents to animals aren't veterinarians, but they can tell when something's wrong and when the animal needs treatment to go to a veterinarian or something. So it's a bogus argument. But anyway, these are the kind of things we look for, and we tell our monitors to look for. Look for licensing that's posted. Take pictures of any cracks, and take pictures of refrigerated cases. They're not supposed to be selling meat, so if there's meat in the case, that means that's a violation. If there's animals roaming around outside of cages, that's a violation. If there's dirt, blood on the floor, that's a violation. If cages are outside and there's feces on them, that's a violation. So we put this all together in a kind of a checklist format for people. And we tell them, you don't have to learn this. You just take if you don't have time to go through this, just take pictures of everything. Because we'll go through the pictures later and we'll assess what violations are there and report on them. So we'll help them through the whole process. So I want to spend most of the time and the last few minutes on this to talk about just some advice on doing this kind of work. I think one of the most important things is security, because there have been a couple of incidents here where we weren't doing investigative work, but another group was doing a protest kind of outside of one place on a public sidewalk, and one of the owners, or I believe it was an owner, was hostile, really hostile, and maybe threatening to a point where it wasn't a safe situation. But they were doing a protest. They were very vocal. What we're doing is kind of going in, trying to act like a typical customer so that we can get footage that's incriminating and without blowing our cover. So that's kind of our goal, because our goal is to shut them down by showing repeated non-compliance issues. So, staying safe, not going alone, maybe going as a group. If they ask you to leave, if they get suspicious, it's probably not good to hang out. You're probably not going to get very far with them. They're probably not going to let you see that much outside of the waiting area. And of course, if the situation feels unsafe, you just leave. Another thing is timing. Getting to know the facility, like Shim was talking about, knowing your location and having it be indisputable and all that. The timing is important because you might be able to find that deliveries, for example, like deliveries are done during closing hours. Sometimes they're done really early in the morning or late at night when there's no staff there. And the truckers literally have keys to let themselves in and out. I'll bring the animals in. And so while they're busy doing that, there might be an opportunity to catch some footage, because, and especially since there's no staff usually at this time. Another good time is an hour like before closing or opening, because those are oftentimes when they're cleaning and doing maintenance work. And if we can catch them, for example, flooding the sidewalk or street or alley with wastewater, oh, that's a great violation to report, because it's a violation of streets and sanitation law and Chicago Department of Public Health. So a lot of these things can be caught on the outside rather than even having to go inside. Another time we found is good is like when it's busy. You got a lot of customers in there, they're not paying much attention to people taking photos or having a camera out. We also have some hidden cameras that we've used, but that's a good time when they're distracted. And the other thing I like to recommend is at least have a couple people, maybe 1 or 2 people with you. One person could be the friendly one, the talkative one, distracting the staff person, and the other person, while the other person is getting the footage that you want. So that kind of leads me into the next section, which is, you know, acting like a customer, acting and dressing like somebody that they would typically see in there, and just kind of striking up conversations with staff to distract their attention. Sometimes, like Shim was talking about, not sometimes, all the time, every time I've been in this situation, there's no lack of animals that are in desperate, terrible situations that you wish you could rescue. But I think it's really difficult, but we have to kind of come back to what our goal is in doing this work to begin with. And if we are in a situation where we want to rescue an animal, but it will blow our cover, we have to think about the potentiality of saving thousands of other animals in the future by shutting a place like this down. If we can't get the footage we need, if we can't show a pattern of violations to get them shut down, then we may lose the opportunity to save thousands of animals in the future. And that might be worth not saving the few right now in front of us. Just a few points in closing about taking photos. Photos, by the way, are more preferred than video in this situation because they're easier to use in our reports. However, if something cannot be documented by photos, it has to be shown in a video, then by all means take a video. When you're using video though, try to be really still. Don't move around as much as you want. Try to do it just very sparingly as you need to, because it's going to be a lot easier to get good still photos out of video if you're kind of still in some, at least focusing on certain things for a few seconds. And you know, like I said earlier, take photos of the conditions that animals are housed in, the conditions of the animals themselves. Look for dilapidated, you know, building problems. Look at the condition of the workers. You don't even have to take photos of their face, but their clothing, just the condition that they're working in. That's something that's reportable too. You may not get past, in the kind of places I'm talking about here, by the way, are mostly like retail slaughterhouses that you find in urban areas that are becoming increasingly more popular, as I said before, because of the fact that the slaughterhouse industry is maxed out and all these small places are trying to open up. But these places want a retail component because it brings in more business for them. And so in a retail area, you're fairly safe in taking photos, at least in the state of Illinois. I can't speak for other states, but you generally want to get consent for taking photos and for recording anything, unless you know what your laws are in your state and you don't have to worry about it. But in general, without consent, you may risk liability there. But the good thing is that in many of these places, it's not uncommon, or it wouldn't be uncommon for someone to ask to see the animals. Because the whole concept here of custom slaughter is that you get to pick the animal that you want slaughtered. And the actual state law says that these places are getting a license that allows them to slaughter animals that customers pick. If they're not picking them and they're just going in and ordering off a menu board, then that's no longer the kind of transaction that is permitted. So if we see that, we know that there's another violation. There's another way to report them. So I'll leave it at that. It's there's some other stuff here that we could get into, but I'm going to share this document with anyone who's interested. There's a section here on creating reports, which gets pretty involved. It's a little bit more advanced. So if we have time maybe to talk about that in the Q&A, that would be great. I just don't want to take up too much time.
Okay. Wow, thank you, Robert, so much. That was so thorough and informative, and of course, shocking, but not shocking, disturbing. And it is astounding that these places are allowed to continue and that laws are not enforced. But thank you so much for your frontline work. So important. And you've had some success, I know, as well. So now we are in our Q&A portion of our workshop, where you guys get to ask questions of Shim and or Robert. So let us know who your question is for, or if it's for either one of them. Go ahead and put them in the chat or click the hand raising icon. And already Shreya, hi Shreya, wants to ask a question. So go ahead and unmute yourself, Shreya.
Yay, thank you. This was really informative, a lot of information indeed. And thank you both for all the incredible work you're doing. I guess my question, well, based on the content that was presented, might be more directed to Shim, but if if anyone wants to take it, like, feel free, Robert, to answer as well. So this, I guess, has to do more with the unexpected opportunity for an open rescue. Like, you see an animal who, you know, if you see an animal who you can rescue and there is no other consequence of potentially, like, you're not putting the risk of shutting down an entire slaughterhouse at risk by rescuing this one animal, and you're able to rescue them. How hard is it to coordinate with the sanctuary? Because from my understanding, and I've talked to several sanctuary founders who do mention the dilemma of sometimes having to say no to unexpected rescues who show up, because, you know, they're like, yeah, the activists, they mean so well, they work so hard to get these animals, but we need to have a plan in place before we can accept them. And of course, some are able to, but how do those logistics work when you have an unexpected rescue? That's my question.
Yeah, great question. And I wish I asked someone knowledgeable this very question before Kaporos week this year, because going in, we had some sanctuaries lined up and we knew about how many chickens we would be able to save. Turns out when we were at the scene, we realized we'd be able to save much, much, much more. And our philosophy at the time, the way we reacted, it was, okay, let's just take everybody, every life we can bring to salvation. Let's bring them out of this scenario. We'll bring them to the midway point, and then we'll deal with where we're going to bring them after that. And it ended up being an ongoing nightmare for a long time. It took months to find places for all of these chickens, and every chicken that we brought from these locations did find a home. But it was asking a lot of different people. And some animals ended up being in a very poor situation for quite some time after that, even though eventually they were all found a home. Going into it this year, our approach is going to be very different. We're going to know exactly the cap of how many we'll be able to save, and hopefully we'll save that number. We'll save as many as we possibly can. But then there will come a moment when we'll have to say, okay, we just have no more spots, and now we'll just document moving forward, and that's it. But yeah, Robert spoke about the pain of seeing animals suffer before your very eyes, but having to remember why you're there. And our instinct is we see someone suffering and we want to jump in and we want to help. We want to do everything we can. But sometimes you just, unfortunately, you can't. And that's the realization I had to come to. So that's what I have to share.
Robert, do you want to add to that? Yeah.
Yeah, so here's the thing with the kosher and halal issue is most of them advertise as selling kosher and halal. And yet, many of them are not certified. And there's like in Illinois, we have the Illinois Halal Act. And you have to be certified in that program. Otherwise, if you advertise as halal or kosher, you could be liable for false advertising. And the act itself is very specific, because when you think about what the repercussions are, it's the people that you're selling to are believing that, for example, halal has zero tolerance for animal pain and suffering. It says the animal can feel no pain or suffering. It's an impossible standard for slaughtering animals in a way that really works to our advantage, because it's an impossible standard. But still, they're advertising being halal, which means at minimum it means being respectful to the animal, then they don't feel any pain or suffering. But yeah, all of them are advertising this. Whether they're not practicing it though, and it's just completely like when you read the religious law, as I'm sure Shim could speak much more eloquently to Judaism, but when in kosher, but they're not practicing. A layman's understanding, you can clearly see the way the animals come in on the trucks and the way they're treated once they're there, and then once they're slaughtered. The whole process from birth to death is not kosher and not halal. And so I don't know what to make of, I just think they advertise that way. So in terms of that question, I'm not even sure exactly how to answer it, Tamir. I'm sorry. It's like a long-winded answer to not even giving you an answer. But yeah, we take you along. I mean, definitely, if somebody wanted to have the experience, we're definitely open to that.
Great. Thank you for answering Tamir's question in the chat.
Thank you.
That was great. And thank you, Shreya, for your question. And any other questions? There was a question from Fanima.
Can I ask one real quick?
Dana, yeah, go right ahead.
Yes. Okay, so I thought this was really a fantastic workshop. Thank you guys so much. And I have never done anything undercover whatsoever. And I mean, I would love to do something like that. I just feel like I don't even know how to first do it. I don't know if we have any, I guess I could look that up if we have any live markets where I am. None that I know, but there probably are, who knows? Because I know they're all over. But are there ways to document that? I probably wouldn't be able to document Kaporos, I would assume. I mean, are there other, what I'm asking is, are there other avenues to go down, other different options that you can document? Because I know slaughterhouses are so incredibly locked down. Yeah.
There might be. It depends on your area, I think.
Okay.
And maybe we could help you find those opportunities.
I would love that. Yeah.
Because some places are locked down, and some are surprisingly, there's no one there.
Have you been to other things that aren't like the live markets where you are? You have, okay. I'm sure there's probably stuff here. I just don't know what to look for, so.
Yeah.
Have you, what other things have you been to that aren't live markets, I guess?
All of the ones in Chicago that we're working on are considered they're considered live markets, except
They're-
for,
okay.
for one that doesn't have any retail component to it.
Okay, okay,
But that's kind of what, because the large scale slaughterhouses moved out of urban areas, but a long time ago. But now we're seeing a trend where that industry is coming back into urban areas again because of, I think there's a lot of reasons, but the large scale places can't take animals. It's inconvenient for farmers to have to take animals several hours somewhere when there could be a place that's only an hour or something away. So there could be some opportunities.
okay.
Yeah.
Jim, do you want to add anything to that? And also, Robert, if you have resources to other grassroots organizations, even in addition to Slaughter-Free Cities, Slaughter-Free Chicago, go ahead and put that in the chat. Or if anybody else has resources for organizations organizing for undercover investigations, go ahead and put that in chat. And maybe Dana's can get some guidance in that. And then Robert, also Matthew was asking in an additional part of the question related to the smaller urban slaughterhouses. Have you heard of them trying to get connected to animal science programs?
Yeah, just once so far. Our Slaughter-Free Denver group there's 2 slaughterhouses they're working on in Denver proper, and one of them is affiliated with the university, the animal science program. So it's funny that you mentioned that, Matt, because yeah, I think that's probably more common than we realize.
Some more questions? Does anybody want to raise their hand and ask a question or put your question in the chat? I know that Panima had asked, what is the hardest part of undercover documenting? And, you guys, any other tips for people who just want to get started that you can offer?
The hardest part, I think, is just being in the presence of suffering and trying to put on a face of being unperturbed, like everybody else around you doesn't seem to notice that there's an atrocity of astounding and horrific proportions going on before your very eyes, and to look like you don't care.
Yeah.
How do you guys manage the stress of that? The dystopia, Claire Mann calls it the dystopia of that. How do you manage the stress before and after? I know we've done other workshops, sort of around that, but anything come to mind for self-care?
I like the point that Robert made of going along with someone, having someone to mentally prepare yourself with, psychologically, emotionally, before and afterwards. In our case, we took several minutes and immersed ourselves in prayer and asked for strength and for comfort and divine encouragement as we do what we believe to be divine and holy and important work. Read passages from what we see as holy scriptures, in which it says that the people who try to do right will have the Almighty on their right hand every second of the way, walking with them, supporting them, and just having those in mind as we went into a place of just such darkness and torment.
Yeah, couldn't have said, that's beautifully said. And I would just say, in terms of, coping, I think what helps me is the realization that as difficult as it is, it's everything that Shim explains and worse. It's a sense of dread that, when you go into this, but what keeps me sane, maybe, or somewhat sane, half sane. I'm not sure where I am in my life at this point. But just knowing that the work we're doing is exposing an industry that really has to be exposed. And we're also, not only are we exposing it, but we're also taking it like steps further by showing how even by these city and state officials' own laws, these places are not operating and can't operate the way they say they should. It's impossible in many cases. And the system is corrupt. So we're exposing corrupt government. We're exposing corrupt alliances between the private sector and public sector, and officials that are corrupt and should be out. So this whole industry is caught up in all of these other nefarious kinds of things going on. And it's kind of fascinating when you peel away the layers of the onion to see what's there. So it's incredibly disturbing, but my sanity is balanced by having to this, learning through this whole thing. It's just really kind of an amazing experience.
Yeah, so Robert, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think is the future of the slaughterhouse industry, or what do you hope is the future of the slaughterhouse industry? And what do you guys think about the pandemic angle as part of our protesting to make those connections between live markets and pandemics? Robert or Shim?
Well, my new favorite term that I learned over the last year is I hope I say it right, a zootic disease. Diseases that come from the way we treat and interact with the animal world around us. And, when I enter a new space or a new situation and I might not have my mask on, they say, oh, are you wearing a mask? Are you vaccinated? I said, better than that, I'm vegan. I'm trying to really, in the way that I live my life every single day before the pandemic, try to create a world where these kinds of crossovers don't happen, because if you treat the world compassionately, you'll be treated compassionately in turn. How about you? And then, what are they going to say to that, right? And then I tell them what zootic disease is and why we have them. So yeah, I draw on that a lot.
Yeah. We often use the statement that the use and abuse of animals is tied together with a complete disregard for the conditions that these places operate in, and that the state and city officials, we always try to put the responsibility more on the city and state officials because they really have the responsibility rather than going after these individual places. But because the point is they're supposed to be doing their job and they're not. But that the fact that we're in this pandemic is a function of this disregard for animals, the use and abuse of animals, and the conditions under which these places are allowed to operate. And so it just heightens the pressure that we put on the health commissioner and the Department of Ag director, because they know it's their responsibility. It's written into the laws. And so we just find it yet another way to heighten our pressure campaigns against them.
Great. Any angle available, certainly we'll pursue. And any more questions for Robert or Shim about this, about undercover investigations, experiences, legalities, and what to do next? I would like to know if anybody's drawn to have a call to action to do something now. Share that in the chat. What you're going to do from after this workshop, if you're thinking of starting up something, please share that. We'd love to know. Go ahead, Shim.
Yeah, a question that Robert, you might be able to help me out with. I was trying to do some research into this in preparation for tonight and couldn't find too much. If someone suspects that there's a case of animal abuse going on somewhere and they trespass, but actually uncover and they show that there was abuse after all, are they protected at all by the law for charges that might be brought for trespassing, anything like that? How does that work?
I'm sorry to say that that's more like of a legal question that is very specific to the state and the region, like the county, the state, even maybe city law. So it varies so much that it would really be hard to answer. But it's a legitimate question. I mean, if we look at some of the case law and some of the cases we see currently, it seems like the courts handle those issues and say, well, this person is guilty of trespassing and eavesdropping. However, they also felt that, you know, they were expressing their right to rescue, because some states actually have a right to rescue if they find an animal that's sick and in need of rescue. The courts might look at that and balance the two and say, well, maybe there's a lesser penalty because this person had good intentions. But you know, it all depends on like who the judge is and the courts, and hopefully you find a judge that is sympathetic, because if you don't, it's scary to think what, you know, and hopefully you've got good, you know, and having good attorneys, we've learned is really key too. So we haven't been arrested on trespassing and eavesdropping, but then again, we haven't had to do that because we've been able to get access in many cases enough that we need. So
I guess we don't have any lawyers in the house right now because nobody's chiming in with their expertise of knowing, and it probably is a good, we've been thinking of a separate workshop about, you know, to bring some vegan lawyers on to talk about this. We always have, you know, so many questions, and we do know that activists get arrested and do get some jail time or do get some penalties. So, you know, it certainly does happen, and it's sometimes in the name of civil disobedience and good, but nonetheless, it's not what we're necessarily seeking. So,
right.
you know, these are great questions. Any other? Oh, I see one more question in the chat. We're going to be a few more minutes, though. We'll be wrapping up, but not in a few minutes further. But what kind of interest have you been able to get from mainstream media? That's a great question. Or non-mainstream media like Jane Unchained, or like that, you know, live streaming media. But Robert, or I know Shim, you shared the one experience that you had, but Robert or Shim, media?
Well, we work with a media agent, and his job is to go out there and try to find us coverage. We just started a working relationship with somebody fairly new in the last 5 or 6 months, and things are going well. We have an investigative report coming out with ABC7, which is the largest a news outlet in Chicago, coming out in December, and it's supposed to be a large investigative report, and we're supposed to be featured in it because we were interviewed and stuff. So we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, I mean, we look at every channel where we can, you know, try to get things out, whether it's social media or mainstream media. And I mean, when you look at YouTube and stuff, it's like some of these influencers have far more subscribers and viewers than some of the mainstream media. It's like, it's incredible, like how much influence and how much audience they have. So we just try to go wherever, you know, we can get that. And, you know, whether whoever it is, well, not whoever it is, but, you know, it could be a YouTuber just as much as it could be ABC7.
And Robert, you write articles yourself. Am I correct? And have you written a book as well?
Yeah.
Do you want to put that in the chat? That would be great too.
Sure. Yeah, the book's called Farm to Fable, The Fictions of Our Animal Consuming Culture. And I write and curate work from other great contributing authors for freefromharm.org. So I'll put that in there. Thanks for asking.
Oh yeah, no, it's a great resource talking about something we can all share with our circles, certainly in the regard to this. So I guess I'll see if there's any final questions, and then I'm gonna put it back to Shim and Robert for just maybe some final points, some final kind of wrap up, final comments, final tips. Any other questions though? This was so highly informative and chock full of information, but very practical as well as inspirational. As always, we have such amazing speakers in our workshops. Please check out all the archived recordings of past workshops. So I see Amanda's got her hand raised. Go ahead and unmute, Amanda.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to touch on Shreya's question that she asked earlier, just at the end. And it was about the sanctuaries. I work with several sanctuaries in Ohio. And the biggest thing is, depending on their size and the room that they have available, when they get a rescue, they usually also have to make sure they have a quarantine area. I put this in the chat, but just in case anyone didn't see it, they have to make sure they have a quarantine area, because when they get vetted, they get checked for any kind of diseases or sickness or anything like that. And they want to make sure that they're not in direct contact with their current residents, just so there's no cross-contamination of any sickness. But then after that, they usually, if they have a board, they have to go to the board and make sure that funding is available for the care for the rest of the life of the animal. I work with a lot, like I sponsor animals. I sponsor 2 turkeys, a duck, and a chicken at 2 different sanctuaries that I volunteer for. And so a lot of them will have that to take care of, like the food and care aspect. But with rescues, it's always so hard because there's, you know, especially in Ohio, we have so many groups where it's like there's always an animal that's in need of a rescue or something like that. And it's really sad that there's not more room. And I swear we have like 10 sanctuaries in Ohio and everyone is full. So it can be a little difficult, but it's always great to prepare for that. And then transporting as well. So I do transporting too. So, you know, those are just a few little tidbits on from the sanctuary perspective of what they have to consider before they say, yes, I'm going to rescue an animal. And sometimes they do take them in without really thinking about it. So I just wanted to touch on that at the end. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for sharing that aspect of it also, Amanda. I think we did a workshop, but I don't know that it's archived, on transportation. I think we did a whole workshop. Is that right, Panima, on animal transportation? This was several months ago, if I remember. Maybe we need to revisit that. I don't think it's on YouTube, but it's a very important piece of it. And we've done workshops on sanctuaries and micro sanctuaries also. So these are all just looking at the whole puzzle of where activism meets before, during, and after rescuing and trying to make a difference. So I guess with no other questions, I'm going to start to head towards wrapping up. But so Robert, and then Shim, a few final words from you.
Apologies. For some reason, I can't seem to send a message to the whole group. It's not giving me that option, but I tried to, I can only send it to like a single person for some reason, but.
Send it to Animal Activism Mentorship and she'll share it.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I just thank you for having me, and I'd love to hear from anyone. There are a couple people on the call that are part of our city teams, one in New York. So anybody who's interested in like learning more about slaughter-free cities might want to consider, you know, kind of exploring becoming a slaughter-free cities team or creating one in your city or town. You know, feel free to reach out. I'll put my email in the chat.
Just one last thought, something that Robert said that really rang true for me is that when you see it before you in person and it's not a video that you saw on the internet, it hits different. And that is so, so true. I was vegan for years before I ever actually had the courage to watch Slaughterhouse footage on the screen. I just read about it. When I finally saw it on the screen, that's what pushed me from being vegan to being an activist. And it enabled me to speak about these issues so much more passionately, having seen them with my own eyes on the TV. But then after seeing it throughout Kaporos week and hearing it with my own ears, seeing with my own eyes, smelling the stench of blood and suffering, whenever I think of the torment to non-human animals, it's those moments that I go back to. And that comes out when you speak passionately about these issues, when you actually stood in the presence of someone who you saw begging for mercy. So I think it's for those that are in a position where they can go do this undercover work, it's well worth the effort, and you're doing good. It matters. So that's the only thing I wanted to add there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really, really great takeaway. Document, 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 document
Mm-hmm.
what you see firsthand, because you're right. It's through the relationships and the rapport we have with the people in our lives. They're much more likely to have their eyes open because it came from you. And so let's go out and sort of remember that. But these have been such great examples you've shared, and I know that you've inspired people. So Robert and Shim, thank you so much. If you have any final things, you can put in the chat. But I want to, before we start to wrap up, announce a few of our upcoming workshops, okay? Because AAM has regular calendars of workshops, more to come. On Tuesday, December 7th, we have Cubes, which is using footage as street activism. On Tuesday, January 4th, we're having a workshop on bearing witness at Slaughterhouse Trucks. And to be determined in terms of a date, a definite date, but we're going to be having 2 workshops with Hope Bohanek in January and February, okay? And so more to come from that as well. If you have any interest in presenting a workshop or some ideas or some people to introduce us to and some resources, feel free to reach out to myself or any AAM mentor. We'd love to hear from you and always appreciate that. So thank you for being here, everybody who's participated. Thank you, Shim and Robert, for your time and wisdom. Thank you, Panima, for working the technical back end. If you're interested in becoming a mentor or mentee, or just want to get more involved with the AAM, please reach out to any AAM mentor. Visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com. We'll put that in the chat again. And follow both AAM and Farm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Clubhouse. So that's the end of our presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone. All the very best.
Take care, all.